Okay, so I've sort of, sat on both sides of the fence. We're sort of, as an academic publisher, spending 15 years commissioning history, art history, those sorts of publishing areas, and also current affairs. And more recently, in the last 10 years, I've also worked as an academic and also as an author. So I kind of feel like I can see it from all sides. But this evening, what I want to do is talk specifically about the value of academic publishers. And to just unpick some of that. And what I've done is I have got a fair amount of text on my slides. I'm not going to read it all out, but you're going to get the slides afterwards, so I thought it would be useful for you to have some background information. So I wanted to highlight a few areas for discussion. A lot of the comments on here from publishers are based on a piece of research I did where I interviewed about 22 US and UK publishers and commissioning editors last year, and they were off the record, so I was getting kind of very straight talking. So it's quite interesting. Some of it's quite surprising. So I think, given that we're living in a really tricky world, Brexit, Trump, you name it, we've got plenty of challenges, the last thing that we want to do in HE and also academic publishing is fight amongst ourselves. We should be looking to collaborate. I think this is really important. It was interesting as well. Obviously open access is part of the policy now, but it's also the case, and Martin will probably be able to correct me on this, but in 2014, some research showed that under 50% of researchers sort of felt very positive about OA. So I think it's interesting to see how that's moved on, because obviously now they're better informed. It's still evolving, this whole kind of area. And one of the things that sort of happened is that, publishers have accepted that they haven't really done a particularly good job on expressing the real value of themselves as publishers for academics. And I think that this has been a real problem, especially because OA emerged out of an entirely different business model, so sort of, academic journals in science, which doesn't bear much relation to arts and humanities publishing. And I think that publishers missed a trick there, expressing their value and also clarifying things a little bit. And I think we're sort of backtracking a little bit with such things as the Crossick report, which really brought a lot of different people together for the first time to look at the challenges of monograph publishing and OA and how to not throw the baby out with the bathwater with academic publishers. So one area that I think is often missed off is commissioning editors. This is something where when you talk to people have very little idea about what a commissioning editor is. I've put a few quotes up here which just give you an idea of the value, why a commissioning editor is useful. Not necessary to academia, but maybe to the publishing company themselves. They're really important. They're the person who goes out and brings in the copyrights which the publisher can exploit to create a sustainable business, which obviously has a benefit to academia as well, because what you're looking for is a sustainable academic record. You're looking for a business that can actually keep going, Publishing has been going in its present form for over 35, 40 years. It has expanded along with HE, in the sort of late 70s, 80s. And it does seem a pity, really, to maybe throw that all out. They've got plenty of experience. And also have invested in lots of infrastructural developments as well over the years. But there are issues and things do need to change, which I think it's been interesting that OA has brought some of those out. So here are just some ideas. I'm not sure how au fait you are with exactly what a commissioning editor does each day, but I've put down a few of the sorts of jobs in amongst going and meeting authors for coffee and discussing exciting ideas. Publishers and commissioning editors specifically have an awful lot of work to do to kind of shape and curate their lists, and also to kind of really use that kind of subject and field knowledge to bring together a stable of authors. Okay, so, commissioning editors are often talked to as being gatekeepers. I think I would argue that actually it's quality control. And I realise that's not necessarily a popular view, but as an ex-commissioning editor, I would say actually that was one of the jobs you do, is you have a very thorough checking process. And you're also looking for balance across your list in terms of subject matter and authors. And I think that commissioning editors are very experienced at this. It's not something that's necessarily very easy to do, and experience really counts for a lot. And when I was interviewing American and British publishers, I asked them to try to describe the added value of the commissioning editor, and I've put some of their responses up here. And I think it's quite interesting. When I wrote an article for the Times Higher I think it was about 6 years ago, and in that I talked about the mysteries of the editorial process of commissioning. And it did seem at that point that people were still quite confused about it. And to be honest, it appears that they still are quite confused. It's not a very transparent industry, which I think has caused it some problems. But also, maybe now is the time to actually open it up a little bit. Commissioning editors are widely considered to be, publishing, academic publishing's kind of secret weapon, in the kind of tricky situation we find ourselves in when we're looking at a post-truth world, maybe for a temporary period, and they can bring a real sense of context to the commissioning that they do, which ultimately benefits the academy, readers of all sorts. And I think it's also worth stressing that they're the creative powerhouses of publishing as well, and that it's quite interesting that, like really a lot of trade publishers and trade commissioning editors, they've been missed out of digital, the digital innovation that's happened, digital training. I've spoken to quite a lot of editors on both sides, and they all confirm that they generally had no digital training, very little exposure to digital technology beyond very basic ebooks. There's been no sense of play, no sense of, understanding digital tools. And if you think that commissioning editors are the people who create books, who shape text, understand how to work with authors to develop really lively products, that readers of all sorts can enjoy, it does seem as though publishing's missed a trick. And I think that this is an area where publishers really need to up their game, both trade and actually academic. But I think specifically academic, given the challenges that we face. And there was lots of comments from my interviewees about the fact that commissioning editors' roles had not changed. And that was my experience too in talking to commissioning editors. They were doing the same thing that I was doing years and years ago. There was no change. They were commissioning more books, which was making it harder for them to spend time with authors on the text, which is obviously a challenge. It also generates added value as well. But really, this was the area that they should be looking at. Digital innovation is really, really important. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have print, because print is an important part of that. But actually thinking about how publications, texts that you get, research that you get from an author can be played with and expressed in a number of different ways for different markets, different audiences. Whether it's some form of, publisher platform where you've got integrated social media, and you're extending the reach, whether it's, developing, sort of trade books, Christmas books, that kind of thing. There's all sorts of ways that academics can reach wider markets with their work. And as I said, it's not just about digital. So digital is important, but actually it's also about print. It's about having ideas, and commissioning editors have ideas. When you're working on something like a new product or a new series, you're often working with authors together to create something new, something imaginative. And this is what's been happening. We have had some signs of life in terms of, developing shorter books, research books. I worked on a very short introduction series at Oxford, 35,000-word books. The idea was you had a really good academic who would express what was most important about their subject area in a very, short space of, pages, and also accessibly as well. And that was also another aspect of the editor that's very, very important. The ability to find accessible writing out of your academic author. And finally, I just wanted to say a word about nonfiction, because this is something that I think is going to be very tricky with open access, and yet serious nonfiction is where academics can reach really, really wide audiences. You're talking thousands, tens of thousands, rather than hundreds. And this is a really hard area to publish in. This is not something that you can do casually as a kind of afterthought. Trade publishing is very tricky. It costs a lot more money in marketing and promotion, but ultimately it involves editors being allowed to spend time on the text with authors, thinking through how they're going to approach the book, looking at cuts, all sorts of things. And I've worked on a lot of trade non-fiction titles where you're brought in to kind of fix books as a book doctor, that kind of thing. And that's actually really, really important. If you want to get your ideas across, considering that kind of trade approach where you're using lots of editorial, work on the manuscript, work with authors, to actually broaden out the appeal of books, their accessibility, and also the range of publication types. Thank you.